Cyclone was relieved to have finally made it through the desert. As the Vaporeon padded softly across the sandy earth and sparse grass of a spacious field, he could see trees ahead and smell water. He was surprised he'd managed to make it through that desert when he had been so weak. Yet, the stone he had touched had given him new strength. He'd even been able to use his water attacks again for a short time, enough to keep him going. And the attack he had gained from it? It was very strange indeed. And Cyclone had an idea of what it was. He had used it once, in the desert, just to try it out. When using the attack, he had felt powerful, invincible, almost. He had liked that feeling. If this attack really was what he thought it was, then it could be just what he needed. Increasing his pace, Cyclone dashed toward the trees, reaching them quickly. Remembering the pharaoh he'd talked to just a short while ago, he set about looking for the tallest tree, enjoying the feeling of grass and soft earth beneath his paws after the long trek through the desert. Based on what the pharaoh had told him, the Pokemon who could give him the answers he needed lived close by. Spotting a very tall, thin tree with several damaged branches, Cyclone ran until he reached the base of the tree. Peering into a small den between two of the roots, reaching out with his paw, Cyclone raked his claws down one of the tree's roots, alerting the attention of the Pokemon in the den. A Zigzagoon scurried out, ruffling his brown and tan fur and staring at the Vaporeon. A newcomer? Well, what is it? He asked in an annoyed tone. This Pokemon seemed to be used to getting visitors. Cyclone supposed many others must come to see him. I was told you know much about stories and legends, the Vaporeon stated calmly. The Zigzagoon shuddered. For some reason, he found it uncomfortable to talk to this Pokemon. Cyclone spoke with such a calm and unreadable expression. It was difficult to know what the water type was thinking. Somehow, that unnerved him. Yes, the Zigzagoon answered slowly. I can tell you one of those legends, but I don't do it for free. Find me some berries, and then you'll get your story. Cyclone smiled ever so slightly, though his eyes remained calm, not betraying his true emotions. I have no berries, the Vaporeon stated in his same smooth and quiet tone, but I'm willing to offer you something much better. Do any humans ever come around here? Humans? The Zigzagoon asked. Yes. Why? Do they try and capture you? Take berries or fruit from this place? Set out traps? Cyclone asked, sitting down and wrapping his tail neatly around his paws. The Zigzagoon shifted uncomfortably. Well, he began, not seeming to want Cyclone to know that the Pokemon in the area had much trouble. They've taken our food before, and there have been a few trappers, and it's a bit difficult to hide from trainers sometimes. Well then, Cyclone stated quietly, you and I both have received ill fate at the hands of humans. Do you think they can be stopped? The Zigzagoon shrugged. Dunno, he replied uneasily. Humans just do what they want. I don't think there's any stopping them. It's just better for us to avoid them. For a moment, the look in Cyclone's eyes took a dark tone, but he quickly regained his tranquil and indecipherable expression. Listen, he began. For a long time, I have thought otherwise. There used to be a great many lands uninhabited by humans, but those areas are quickly shrinking. Do you want to send a message to the humans? To tell them that these lands were ours to begin with? To tell them that Pokemon aren't their servants? To tell them that they cannot maim or abuse Pokemon any longer? Well, that would be nice, but how? The Zigzagoon asked, looking at Cyclone with a puzzled expression. If there was a way, Cyclone replied in a clear tone, his voice sounding calm and mysterious. Would you? After a moment's hesitation, the Zigzagoon nodded. Cyclone smiled another one of his faint smiles. Then tell me, he whispered, about the forbidden attacks. Snowcrystal was running frantically through a dark, thickly wooded forest. Branches and vines seemed to jump out at her as she ran, causing her to stumble and fall, or force her to stop and claw her way through. This frightened her, for something was chasing her, She was trying to get away, but as she went on, the branches became more thick and tangled, and she was fighting back panic as she ran. She did not know what was following her. She just knew that she had to get away at all costs. Suddenly she emerged into a quiet clearing, strangely feeling the threat of her pursuer lift. Whatever it was gone. Though how? She didn't know. She was staring instead at a pool of water, and around it were other Pokemon. She recognized her friends among them. Noticing Thunder and Stormblade sitting by the pool, she ran up to them, feeling relieved. She noticed that the other Pokemon, the ones she didn't know, looked faded, as if they were made of nothing but shadow. She chose to ignore them, and sat beside Stormblade, who was leaning down to drink from the pool. "Stormblade!" she cried in relief. "I'm so glad you're here. I thought you might have—" She stopped, for Stormblade had suddenly gone rigid. His eyes grew wide and he jerked away from the water and stumbled back from the pool, only to fall down on his side where he lay gasping for breath. Wondering what was wrong with him, Snowcrystal quickly turned around to ask the others for help, but surprisingly, they were gone. She and Stormblade were alone. She turned back to the Scyther, who was trembling, and seemed to be having trouble breathing. "What's wrong?" she shouted desperately, seeing that his eyes were wide with pain, and his struggles seemed to be growing weaker. "Thunder? Wildflame! Rosie! Spark!" she shouted, looking frantically for her friends. "Something's wrong with Stormblade, and I don't know what it is." She stopped and glanced at Stormblade, whose breathing seemed to have stopped altogether. She tried to rush to his side, but sharp fangs met roughly in her scruff and pulled her away. She was released and turned around to see Ice Fang, her tribe's leader, looking at her sternly. "Have you forgotten what you went on this journey for?" he growled, advancing toward her and coming to stand between her and Stormblade. Snowcrystal shook her head vigorously. "Then move on," Ice Fang growled, pushing her forward and rushing after her, until she was forced to take a completely different path from the clearing, heading through the darkened forest, which seemed to be fading now, once again. Snowcrystal's eyes opened as she woke suddenly. She looked around slowly, for a moment unsure of where she was. Faint starlight glinted in her eyes, and she tried to look up toward the source of the light, only to find that it was hard to move. Small vines had been tied around her paws and muzzle. They were not the moving vines that had captured her, but strange, thin, yet strong normal vines that she couldn't break when she tried to struggle. Trying to calm herself down, she moved her head in order to glance around. She was lying in a fairly large cavern next to a few large columns of stone, reaching up to the ceiling. Near the center of the roof of the cavern was a large hole, through which moonlight was shining. She could hear whispers all around her, but at first she could not see any of her friends. Through the darkness of the cave, shapes began to appear. The shapes of various different Pokemon, all grass types, were moving in and out of various cave tunnels. Two of them, an Ivysaur and a young Tropius, rested on rock ledges near the moonlit hole in the ceiling. Though there was a way for light to come in, at least in this cavern, it seemed odd that there would be grass types living in a cave. A groan from behind her made her try to turn around, but it was difficult to move. She craned her neck backwards, noticing Spark's spiky yellow fur close behind her. "Spark," she whispered, finding it hard to speak with the vine around her snout. "Are you awake?" Spark painfully turned his head toward her, glancing around the cave in confusion. "Where are we?" he asked, his voice sounding muffled because of the vine around his own muzzle. "I don't know," Snowcrystal replied quietly. "Deeper in the cave, I guess. The grass Pokemon must have taken us here." "Well, of course they did," Spark growled, looking around. "Watch me give them a little surprise. Cover your eyes, Snowcrystal." At first, Snowcrystal was confused at his request, but immediately placed her bound paws over her eyes as hundreds of small, thin spines shot out of Spark's pelt and toward the grass Pokemon. Several of them struck her, and she whimpered. However, a moment later, and it was over. None of the grass types had cried out, but the Ivysaur and young Tropius glared at them, and so did a small Oddish who just entered the cave. Spark gave them a threatening growl, his fur crackling as he readied an electric attack. Snowcrystal knew that the attack wouldn't do much good against these strong-looking grass types, but she couldn't attack, so it was their only way of fighting back. She wished she knew where the others were. With a surprising speed, the Ivysaur lashed out with one of its vines, striking Spark across the face and causing him to skid backwards a few feet. The Jolteon turned his head toward the grass types and growled again. Snowcrystal cringed. They weren't going to get anywhere by fighting while they were tied up. Maybe the whole thing was all a misunderstanding. If they had trespassed in the grass type's cave, it had been an accident, and she knew it wouldn't hurt to try and explain. "Please listen to us," Snowcrystal cried from between clenched teeth. "We didn't know this was your cave. We'll leave. Just let us and our friends go." "Quiet," snapped the young Tropius. "We know that you're either spies or you were planning to attack us. A foolish move, I might add." "Are you insane?" Spark snarled angrily. "We came into the cave to hide from humans. You can have the stupid cave. We just want to get out of here." "You're lying," the Tropius shouted, but the Ivysaur interrupted him. "Wait a minute," he said quietly. "It does seem strange that they had an electric type with them, and this is certainly the first white growlithe I've seen. Besides, they don't seem to know what we're talking about." "Yeah," Spark agreed. "What are you talking about?" "Shut up," the Tropius yelled. "They're probably just trying to trick us," he added with a glance at the Ivysaur. "They're some of those fire Pokemon that took our land and forced us to live in this filthy cave. We barely have any food, and it's all because of them." "Calm down," the Ivysaur replied impatiently. "It's very possible that this could be a trick. But," he added, seeing that Spark was about to protest, "we should talk this over with the others first before we decide on what to do with them." The Tropius nodded reluctantly and followed the Ivysaur through a tunnel and out of the cavern. A moment later, a Bayleaf appeared, followed by Wildflame and Rosie, who were limping. Neither of them had any vines around them, but they both seemed fearful of attacking. "Stay here with the others," the Bayleaf ordered them, and left the cavern. Wildflame quickly broke the vines from around Spark and Snowcrystal's paws and snouts, and the two stood up, looking relieved. "Wildflame," Snowcrystal began, "do you know why they're keeping us here? We heard they—" "Yes," Wildflame replied. "Apparently, there's a group of fire Pokemon who drove these grass types out of their home." Snowcrystal remembered the cool streams and lush grass they had passed through before. Maybe that had been where the grass types' home had been? "And since we're fire types," Wildflame continued, "they think we're some of the ones who drove them out." Her gaze drifted to the hole in the cave ceiling. "Do you think there's a way we can climb up there?" she asked. "I don't think so," Snowcrystal said quietly. "Those ledges look too high up for me to climb, and I had to climb plenty of times back at the mountain. I think the grass types use Vine Whip to pull themselves up or something, and that Tropius can fly. I don't really know how we'd get up there." "I think it's ridiculous that they think we're responsible for what some wild fire types did," Spark growled. "Can't they realize a white growlithe wouldn't live around here?" "They think we've been sent here as spies," Rosie whispered, and Snowcrystal could see pain in the Ninetales' expression. Her leg must be hurting badly. "They see you and Snowcrystal, and me as well, because I'm injured, as just a way to get them to think that we're not trying to trick them." She shrugged. "I'm not sure how we're going to convince them otherwise." For a little while more they talked quietly amongst themselves, and then the Ivysaur and Tropius returned. "We've made a decision," the Ivysaur stated, sitting calmly in front of them. "Attack us and you'll regret it. I don't think you want to deal with poison powder." Rosie and Spark cast nervous glances at each other, and then looked back at the Ivysaur as he continued. "It is entirely possible that you could be travelers passing through, and it's also entirely possible that you could be spies or attackers. I'm afraid we can't just let you leave unless we have proof of your innocence. And to prove that," he added, "we have decided that you will help us battle the fire Pokemon and reclaim our home." "What?" Rosie cried, outraged. "That's not fair. This isn't our fight. It doesn't concern us at all. And how exactly am I supposed to fight in a battle with my leg broken like this?" "Quiet," hissed the Tropius. "He's giving you a simple choice. Help us fight the battle in a few days, or rot in this cave." He narrowed his eyes angrily before finishing. "It's your choice. I'd choose wisely if I were you." Stormblade wished that morning would come. Even though he knew he would have to travel again, he was desperate for the long night to be over. He knew there was no way he'd be able to sleep, not when he was in so much pain, and he felt miserable and alone. Sitting up, he began slowly sharpening his sides, hoping that the simple action would be some distraction from the pain he was feeling. The sudden snap of a twig somewhere behind him caused him to turn. To his surprise, he noticed Thunder limping through the clearing on the other side of the trees, obviously not noticing him. "Thunder?" he whispered quietly, but he didn't receive an answer. Worried, he stood up slowly, using the nearest tree for support. He sat down as he began coughing again, and waited for it to subside before staggering upright and slowly following Thunder. He tried to keep as quiet as possible, though it was hard when he kept stumbling. However, Thunder never turned or noticed him. She seemed too distracted. Stormblade almost felt that he could have made as much noise as possible and she still wouldn't have turned around. He increased his pace as much as he could, getting closer until he could see Thunder clearly. One thing that both surprised and worried him was that she was stumbling, limping, almost as badly as he was, not bothering to hide her pain. Every few steps, she would let out a gasp or a hiss of pain, and sometimes pause to struggle for breath and quietly mutter words that Stormblade couldn't hear. It was so unusual and surprising that he stopped suddenly, wondering if he should ask Redclaw, the Arcanine who had saved him, for help. Only too late did he realize that he'd paused for too long. Giving no warning, Thunder whirled around, an enraged look in her eyes that made Stormblade realize that she really only had just noticed him. Before he could move, Thunder raced toward him, lashing out at him. Stormblade felt the dull side of the other scythe's blade slam into his uninjured leg, knocking him off balance and causing him to fall flat on his back, which, due to his burns, hurt. Thunder stood over him, placing her foot firmly on his chest to hold him down and raising her sides above him. However, Stormblade could tell that she didn't intend to attack him. She was just angry, and that anger was quickly fading away to be replaced with annoyance. "Why are you following me?" Thunder asked, regaining some of her calm, though she did not let Stormblade up. I was, Stormblade rasped, "just trying to see if you were all right." He wasn't sure how Thunder would react to his statement, as she had never seemed to approve of him being concerned about her. Thunder narrowed her eyes, and Stormblade noticed that she was standing firmly again. Nearly all traces of pain had gone from her expression. "I'm fine," she spat. "I always was. There's no need for you to follow me around." She pressed her foot down harder, and Stormblade winced. "I'm sorry," Stormblade replied weakly, not knowing what else to say. To his relief, Thunder backed away from him, allowing him to sit up. He looked up at her, suddenly realizing with shock that crimson blood was slowly oozing from the gunshot wound in her side. The wound hadn't been bleeding that badly before, except for when she had first gotten it. "Your wound," he gasped. "Are you—" "Shut up," Thunder yelled, her anger coming back. "I came here to be alone. Alone. I thought you'd at least have the decency to let me be by myself for once without having to come and follow me. There's no way you could help me anyway." "How do you know?" Stormblade replied. "I'm your friend. I want to help you." Thunder stiffened at the mention of the word friend and glared at him. "You can't even help yourself," she retorted. "You're helpless and weak. There's nothing you could do." Stormblade remained silent for a moment, confused over Thunder's last statement. Maybe it had just been his imagination, but it almost seemed like, for once, she wanted help. She just didn't think anyone could help her. "Well," he began hesitantly, pausing when he had to cough. "It seemed like something was bothering you, and not just your wounds. And He didn't have time to finish, as Thunder interrupted him, completely changing the subject. "Why on earth do you still have those bandages on?" she asked in an annoyed tone. "Everyone who sees you can see that you've willingly let humans, try to help you. It shows how weak you are. You would never have survived as one of Master's Pokemon. Ever." Stormblade was about to make an angry reply, but stopped himself just in time. Instead, he just muttered, "I don't want my wounds to get infected any worse than they already are." He turned his gaze away from her, staring at the ground instead. It was hard to think clearly through all the pain, and he was beginning to regret following Thunder. He was surprised that she hadn't tried to drive him away yet. Thunder didn't reply to his statement. She turned away from him, leaning against a tree for support. Stormblade could tell that she was leaning rather heavily against it, looking as if she could collapse any moment. He knew now that her tough attitude was just an act, and he wasn't sure she could keep it up. "Look," Stormblade told her, "I just want to help, but if you want me to leave, I will." He was aware of Thunder glaring at him, but she said nothing, so he hesitantly continued, "You know, you don't have to hide the fact that you're in pain. It's not a weakness, and if you let others help you, it'll be a lot easier to bear." For a moment, Thunder looked furious, obviously angry with the fact that he could tell that she was hiding her weakness, but to his surprise, she seemed to calm down after he finished speaking. "How?" she asked curiously. "If a Pokemon is in pain, another Pokemon can't just simply take that pain away. They'd be wasting their time trying to help." Stormblade wasn't sure how to reply. He was still surprised that Thunder hadn't run away or forced him to leave yet. He wondered if she was just listening to him because she needed a way to pass the time. As he was about to speak, Thunder interrupted him. "You aren't a healer," she told him, "so you can't help me. Not that I really need a healer anyway. I survived most of my wounds on my own. Master only ever treated the injuries of his Pokemon if they were serious or they got infected. I lived through worse than this. I'll be just fine," she emphasized the last word with a growl, digging her claws angrily into the dry earth. Stormblade decided that he shouldn't press the matter further. "Do you want me to leave?" he asked sadly, leaning against a tree and getting ready to stand up. Strangely, Thunder just shrugged. "I don't care," she stated crossly. Stormblade stayed where he was, not replying. He really didn't feel strong enough to walk all the way back to where he'd been resting, though he knew it was only a relatively short distance. He felt too weak to stand up and walk back, and he was dizzy from pain. Remembering what Thunder mentioned about Master, Stormblade sighed and told her, "I think I understand, at least a little, about what your master did to you, and what it was like. I mean, Justin never injured me, but, well, he wasn't exactly the best trainer." "So you think you understand?" Thunder asked, sounding more amused than angry. She watched him through narrowed eyes, though she seemed curious about what his response would be. "Well, you see," Stormblade began, "when Justin captured me, I had been separated from my swarm. I was lost and had recently been in a fight. I was injured, and I had been wandering through the forest aimlessly when Justin appeared. He was very frightened and sent his Jolteon, Spark, to attack me. We fought, and I was winning, despite my wounds. Spark scarcely had the energy to dodge my blows, and Justin could see that he was going to get hurt, so he threw a Pokeball at me while I was distracted. He was trying to give Spark time to get out of range and catch his breath, but he didn't expect the Pokeball to actually capture me." "He caught you the first time he threw a Pokeball?" Thunder asked, coming as close to smiling as Stormblade had ever seen her. "That's pathetic." "I was weak from the fight," Stormblade muttered, looking at the ground. At first he felt angry, but then he realized that Thunder hadn't tried to silence him, and she still wasn't making him go away. Whether it was just for amusement or not, it seemed as if Thunder really wanted someone to talk to right now. Deciding to forget her last comment, he continued, "I was confused at being captured, but even while in the Pokeball, I could hear a little of what Justin was saying. He hadn't wanted to capture me. He didn't want a Scyther, and he wanted to get rid of me. But he was afraid to release me because he thought I might attack him. I found out later that he was going to tie my Pokeball to a rock and just drop it into a river, but he didn't. He realized that I was a good fighter after my battle with Spark, and chose to keep me, because most of his other Pokemon weren't as skilled in battle as I was. But that was all he cared about. Other than that, I meant nothing to him. He was always afraid of me, and he never got over that fear. I suppose it's even worse now. The fear stopped him from ever trying to get to know me, like he did with his other Pokemon. I was often made to stay in my Pokeball, not getting to eat as much as the other Pokemon did. He neglected me most of the time, though I know he didn't always mean to. After a long time, Justin went back to his house during the winter and let me out in the snow. I tried to find shelter and ended up finding a hurt human and trying to protect her from a Kabutops. But by the time the other humans had found her, she had died. They thought I was the one who killed her. Justin was made to release me, Spark, and the others, and he got his trainer's license taken away. What's a trainer's license? Thunder asked curiously. It's what all trainers have to own Pokemon, Stormblade told her. It's like a small card or something. If a trainer shows up at a Pokemon Center without one, they can get in big trouble. Thunder muttered to herself. I think Master had something like that. He never had to use it in the places where I battled, though. Stormblade wasn't sure what to say, so he went on. Not many days ago, soon after Rosie was captured, he gave a sad sigh and continued. I went looking for water during a rainstorm, because I knew I couldn't make it to a stream by myself with these injuries. I heard a human coming and quickly ran into a cave. That human was Justin, and there was another human there. It must have been his friend. The female human wanted to help me, but didn't have the right medicine. Justin was afraid and threw rocks at me, but he didn't recognize me. His friend wanted to take me somewhere where I could get food and help, despite the fact that Justin didn't want her to. However, Justin somehow found out who I was. He made the other human go out of the cave and told her that I was a murderer. I suppose it makes no difference, he sighed. Those Team Rocket humans would still have invaded the Pokemon Center, and I would have gotten captured anyway. I'm just glad Redclaw was able to help me out of that building. Thunder didn't ask what Team Rocket was, but she looked confused and a little angry after Stormblade finished speaking. So that's it? She asked, sounding unamused. That's your oh-so-horrible trainer story? Well, Stormblade began, I thought... Your trainer was nothing but a cowardly weakling, Thunder growled. And you felt bad about the way he treated you? What did he do? Forget to feed you for a few days? Leave you out in the cold for a couple hours? Is that all? Stormblade replied quietly, I just wanted you to know that I've went through some of the same things you did. Of course not everything, but I understand what you had gone through. You're far from understanding, Thunder stated coldly, and her dark blue eyes narrowed. You're complaining about a trainer who is a forgetful coward, but nothing more. I don't see how this has anything to do with me, or how it's supposed to make you understand. I'd understand if you told me, Stormblade replied slowly. Told you what? Thunder replied, seeming annoyed and almost angry again. About your trainer, Stormblade told her. What he did to you. Maybe if you told me, I could understand better. What's there to understand? Thunder asked. If you want to know about Master, ask Redclaw. He knows too. Stormblade hesitated for a moment before replying. Redclaw wasn't your Master's Pokemon for as long as you were. Was he? The question caught Thunder by surprise, but she just muttered. You're right. He wasn't. Stormblade paused for a moment before asking. How long were you owned by your master? Thunder stiffened and gave him an angry glare. Stormblade wondered if asking her these questions had really been a good idea after all, and she merely hissed at him. Why do you want to know? And more importantly, why do you care? Stormblade wasn't sure how to answer. He didn't feel like she would understand if he tried to tell her that it was because he wanted to help. She hadn't responded kindly to him when he had said it before. Pain was still filling his mind, making it hard for him to think. He wished it would go away, for only a few seconds, so he could think of what to say. Because I don't want you to be hurt, he managed at last. I want to know if there's some way I can help you. And I think if you told me about your trainer, I would understand better and maybe find a way. Thunder remained silent, staring at Stormblade with a mixture of confusion and uncertainty. However, she had to admit, she wasn't entirely sure she disliked the idea. though she was still hesitant. "What good would that do?" she asked, but there was no snarl or growl to her voice this time. "You said I didn't understand," Stormblade responded. "Well, I want to understand." He reached out with his scythe and lightly touched the side of it to Thunder's, but she jerked her arm away as if he had burned her. "Why?" she asked. "All I'd be telling you about is events in the past. Memories that don't matter anymore." "But they do matter," Stormblade told her. "If they can help me understand and be able to help you, they do. You can tell me about it now, if you want to. There's no reason to worry. I only want to help you." Thunder hesitated, not liking the way Stormblade seemed to imply that she was worried. There was no reason she should be. After all, Stormblade was the one who was worried, and worried for no real reason. She wondered if it was even worth listening to him anymore. Yet the way he had spoken to her, he had seemed so sincere and so willing to listen to her, for the sole purpose of trying to help. She wasn't sure any other Pokemon would ever be willing to do that. Most of the others she had traveled with hadn't wanted to put up with her after a while, and had left her all alone for the most part. She had wanted it that way, but now, she wasn't as sure. And she wasn't sure she wanted to share her memories either, but she felt that if she didn't now, there might never be a time again when someone would willingly offer to help her. And besides, the memories were just thoughts of the past. They didn't matter in the present. They were long since over. If the memories don't matter anymore, she thought to herself, then there's no reason not to share them. "Fine," she muttered, crossing her blades and fixing her gaze on Stormblade. "What do you want to know?" "Well, when and how did you get caught by Master?" Stormblade asked calmly, feeling the pain of his injuries start to get worse. He slowly lay down on the dry ground and watched her. Thunder sighed impatiently, as if she was annoyed already and just wanted to get the whole thing over with, but nevertheless she answered his question. Surprisingly, her answer was much longer than Stormblade had expected. "It was a long time ago," she began, speaking calmly. "I was very young and small. My wings had not yet grown enough to carry me in flight, and my blades were not sharp enough to inflict any bad injuries. I was somewhere in a forest, and I had a bad wound in my head. I couldn't remember anything, but I was probably too young to remember much anyway. There was another Scyther there, a small male, even younger than I was. He could have been my brother. I never knew. We were both injured, but he was worse off. He was missing 2 of his wings, and one of his sides was broken in half. He also had a lot of deep cuts in his back. Whatever had happened, it certainly hadn't gone well for him, whoever he was. I didn't know what had happened to us, and he wouldn't talk, or couldn't talk. We stayed there in the forest, and for some reason, I tried to take care of him. I couldn't, really, but I still tried. I did not know how to hunt, so we went hungry for a while. Then a few days later, a human showed up with a Cyndaquil. I didn't know what a human was at the time, but I could tell that him coming closer wasn't a good thing. He didn't see us as a threat, and he picked me up. I cut him, and he made his Cyndaquil attack me. After that, he took us in a human vehicle and away from the forest. We got taken into some building and put together in a cage. We were left there for a little while, sometimes given food that tasted strange. I think that other Scyther was the only reason I got through the first few days. I was scared then. The room and the cage were cold, so we huddled together most of the time. After a while, that human, Master, came back. He took me out of the cage for a moment and said something to Volko, his Cyndaquil. He caught me in a Pokeball, but didn't want me to stay inside it, so he let me out and then put me back in the cage. Then he took the other Scyther out. He must have decided that Scyther was too weak, so he ordered Volko to kill him. He did it right in front of me. Thunder paused for a moment and turned away, and Stormblade could see a spark of anger in her eyes, yet she remained calm, though her voice was a little shaky. I realized later that Master never wanted to bother training him. He knew his injuries were too bad, and he'd never make it through the training. He kept me, though he didn't think I would be very strong at first. She shrugged and turned back to Stormblade. That's it, she stated simply. Don't know how this is supposed to help you or me, but you have your answer. Happy now? Stormblade looked shocked and horrified. Why would your trainer kill one of his own Pokemon? He blurted out. How could he do something like that? Why did he even take that other Scyther from the forest if he was just going to... You said you wanted to know about Master, Thunder asked suddenly, interrupting Stormblade and fixing a piercing gaze on him. Now that she had told him a little about her trainer, she seemed willing to tell him more, and Stormblade wasn't sure he knew why. Well then listen, Thunder continued, and some of her anger faded. She wasn't exactly certain why she wanted to tell him this, but she had nothing to lose, and it wouldn't matter to her if Stormblade told anyone. Maybe telling him about Master would be a good thing. After all, maybe he would finally leave her alone after this. She leaned closer to Stormblade, speaking more quietly this time, as if trying to make sure that her voice wouldn't wake Redclaw up. Speaking in a calm tone once again, she began. You see, Thunder told him, Master wasn't a trainer like yours. Yes, I've heard of trainers before, and I'd never trust one. But Master was worse. He fought Pokemon for money, and got a lot of money from it. Humans would make bets during the battles. Master's Pokemon won lots of times. Humans mostly bet on him. Master caught most of his own Pokemon. He usually didn't buy them from others. Well, he did sometimes, but not often. He usually caught young Pokemon. I think he wanted to train them early. He caught Pokemon all the time. He would bring them back to one of his training places and put them in cages for a few days. Then later, make them wear a collar and chain them up. He didn't usually keep them in Pokeballs, unless he was taking them somewhere. Master had older Pokemon, ones he had trained a long while, but I didn't see them very often at first. I was mostly in a cage in one of the many buildings Master had put us in, or chained up outside when we were far enough away from cities. I was usually around other small Pokemon when I was little. Master had a way of training his Pokemon. He caught a great many of them and found the strongest by process of elimination. To put it simply, he put us through constant training, day after day, and those who didn't survive were simply just too weak. Most of them died, but Master didn't care. He had a lot of Pokemon, and only the strongest mattered to him. The only one I knew of who never had any training was Volko. Master was kind to him, and Volko greatly adored and respected Master. I always hated Volko, despised him. He would often taunt me with food, insult me, stupid things like that. That didn't really matter, but Volko got to punish me with fire attacks sometimes. It was never enough to seriously injure me. It was just to cause pain. The wounds usually healed fast. Like the others, I got trained from when I was little. There was what he called the usual training, the battles, the attack practice. I got hurt a lot, but it usually wasn't so bad. The other training was worse. Master wanted Pokemon who could fight while enduring great pain, so he trained his Pokemon to do that. He would, well, torture us. I think he believed that if we got used to such pain, any pain we felt on the battlefield would be insignificant in comparison to it. He did that lots of times, just causing me pain so I could get used to it, so I could have better endurance. He started out by just giving me small jolts of electricity when I was little, but it got worse as I got older. It got a lot worse. Before I had done enough training to be put in a real fight, I would get put in practice ones, against another of Master's Pokemon, usually one he didn't consider very valuable, one that had survived but that didn't handle the training well. If I fought well against that Pokemon, Master would have me fight too. If I got hurt, he said it was just to make me stronger. I couldn't stop battling because Master always had Volko around him, and he would use some fire attack on me. Plus, Master had advice that would electrocute me if I stopped. I sometimes passed out from this, and only got punished later. I learned that it was better to just obey him. He would be able to make me do what he wanted later anyway, and I got food if I obeyed the first time. At this moment, Thunder paused. But Stormblade didn't want to interrupt her, and after a moment, she went on. At first, she began, and Stormblade thought he detected a hint of sadness in her voice. I tried to make it through everything by asking for some help from some of the other young Pokemon there. They would give me food sometimes if I didn't get any, and I gave them some of my food sometimes too. We were always trying to help each other, and I became close to some of them. But the ones I befriended eventually died. They didn't make it through the training. I had to watch some of them die. It used to horrify me whenever one of them was killed. As time went on, I saw more Pokemon die. But after I'd seen a large number of them pass away and become distraught after each one, even if I hadn't known them, the other Pokemon started telling me to just forget it and move on. And after a while, after a time of seeing more and more deaths, I started to listen. They told me there was no point, that it didn't matter, that this is just the way things were. And in time, I stopped caring. I kept being trained by Master with the other Pokemon, being repeatedly told these things, and I believed them. It was all I was ever told. I no longer cared if someone else was hurt or killed. All that mattered to me was surviving the day, proving myself tough enough so that I could become one of Master's stronger Pokemon, so I would not have to go through torture anymore. When I was old enough and Master was satisfied that I was strong enough, he began putting me in real fights. At this moment, Thunder paused again, staring around the grove of trees briefly before continuing. When she did, she had regained her calm and almost emotionless voice again. The fighting areas he brought me to were strange. They didn't look like the ones we practiced in. They were usually in a big building or outside. Lots of humans always came to watch. There were others like Master, too. They would bring a strong Pokemon, and me or one of Master's other Pokemon would battle them. Master and the other human would release their Pokemon into an enclosed area, or sometimes a deep pit, which had a force field over the top so we couldn't fly or climb out. I think the humans were afraid we would attack them. I never tried, though. I only wanted to win so Master would be happy with me. When he was happy, he treated me better. Master would starve me before these fights. Not for too long, only a few days, but enough to make me want to win. If I did win, he gave me food as a reward. In most of these fights, I just had to make the other Pokemon faint, and it took a long time. They didn't faint easily, and it was usually only after they had lost a lot of blood. But I was used to fighting, so most of these battles were easy enough. But there were some that were far worse. Not many humans made their Pokemon battle in these fights, but Master did. He knew he was taking a risk by entering one of us because of all the time he spent training me and the other Pokemon he used. We had won a lot of fights, and he had gotten a lot of money, but he took this risk so he could earn even more. In these fights, though, Pokemon fought to the death. Sometimes there were a lot of us in the arena at once. Other times there were just 2 at a time. Either way, there was only one simple rule. To win, you had to be the last one alive. I never wanted to kill my opponents at first, but he made me do it so many times, it started to feel like the natural thing to do. These battles were much fiercer. Pokemon were fighting to stay alive. They were desperate. But I was trained to ignore pain and keep fighting regardless of any injuries I sustained. I almost always came out of these battles badly hurt. Later, Master would treat my wounds himself. Unlike the other humans, from what I knew of them, he would do it while I was conscious. Even though I was chained, he knew I could still attack him, but I never did. He knew I wouldn't. He would not give me any medicine for the pain, but he would give me some food while he did it. But only a little. I didn't injure him, because I knew I wouldn't get any more food if I did, and I couldn't kill him. I would starve to death if I did, because I was chained. And no one would be there to bring me food, and he knew that. I believe Master was looked up to by other humans who trained battle Pokemon. I think they admired the way he could always keep himself in control, and that he showed no fear of his Pokemon. I once saw a human who was whipping his Pokemon after a battle, and he lost control of the Pokemon, and it nearly killed him. Aside from him and a few others, most of the humans didn't dare try to use whips on their Pokemon, but Master did. I think the only reason he used a whip was because he wanted to show that he could do it, to prove to other humans that he could do it and his Pokemon wouldn't turn on him, to show that he was in control. Thunder turned away from Stormblade and focused on a single star shining in the night sky, seeming lost in thought, though she still looked calm. After a while, she continued, though she seemed to be getting tired of talking, the fight stopped. I think other humans made the fight stop. Master couldn't go to some of his buildings anymore because he was worried they would find out what he was doing. For a while, Master didn't try to find any new places to battle other humans, though I knew it was bound to start again sooner or later. He kept training me, though. I was special to him. Not special, like Volko was special, but I was an excellent fighter in his eyes. I won him a lot of money, so I was valuable. He didn't torture me all that often, though he did tell a Pokemon to attack me or else use the whip on me when I lost a practice battle or did something to displease him. I was used to it. He still often brought in new Pokemon, but he didn't torture them. Or if he did, it was very rarely. He seemed to be satisfied with me and the others who'd gone through the torture training, and wasn't so harsh on the newer and younger Pokemon, like Redclaw. Master usually just chained me up every day and left me, except for when he would put me in practice battle. Then, there was that one night, at one of his training buildings, when you found me. After you set me free, I flew into the forest and wandered around for a while, until I found you and the others again. She stopped for a moment and thought of something else. That Typhlosion you battled, the one I was fighting after I left you and the rest of the group, that was Volko. The human there, that was Master. She turned toward Stormblade again and waited for his response, wondering whether she should be angry or amused by whatever he said. Stormblade was hardly sure what to think. He was angry and shocked by what Thunder's trainer had done to her, and surprised, too. He had known that Thunder had been abused, but he'd never known the full story, the extent of it. He wanted to help her now, more than anything, but he wasn't sure he knew how to. He could scarcely believe that Thunder's master had done. This human had ruined Thunder's life, and all for the sake of money. Stormblade knew that if he himself had been put through the same thing Thunder had, he would most certainly have died. Thunder had gone through so much pain. Even his own wounds seemed like nothing in comparison. Thunder, he began, and the other Scyther looked at him uncertainly. I'm sorry, Stormblade whispered quietly, unsure of what else to say. I'm sorry for everything you had to go through. Why? Thunder. You didn't do it. She then realized that Stormblade had said a lot of other confusing things already, and didn't bother to question him. I hate Master, she growled before Stormblade could say anything more. If I ever find him again, I'll kill him. She spoke with a ferocity that surprised Stormblade, and there was a deadly gleam in her eyes. She wasn't looking at Stormblade. In fact, she almost seemed to have forgotten that he was there. I think I understand now, Stormblade said quietly, attracting Thunder's attention once again. His voice shook, but he continued. I mean, I still probably don't entirely, but I understand better now. I'm sorry. I should have tried to help you more before. I wanted to. I was just never sure how. I'm not even sure what I can do now. But at least it's over now. You don't have to worry about Master or Volko or any of them anymore. Thunder just stared at him, not knowing what to think. She wasn't sure whether to make an angry reply or to just leave. It felt better to have talked about Master. She was calmer now. Why was Stormblade acting as if everything was worse? She felt like telling him she was fine, that she didn't need his help, and that she could manage on her own. She felt like telling him to leave so she could go back to sleep and worry about everything later. But she didn't. "It's not over," she replied quietly, causing Stormblade to look up at her in surprise. She hadn't wanted to confess any weakness to anyone, but somehow, telling him this now seemed like the right thing to do. "Back when I fought the Vespiquen and Volko, I lost control. I was ready to kill both of them. I would have killed both of them. When I left Master, I thought the same thing you did, that I could start over and forget about it. But I can't. It isn't over. And it won't ever be." She stared silently at the ground and didn't even move when Stormblade limped closer to her. "Don't worry," he told her softly, touching the tip of his blade lightly to her shoulder. Thunder stiffened at the touch, but this time she didn't move away. "Back then, when you were Master's Pokemon," Stormblade said quietly, "no one was ever really able to help you. But you're not in this alone anymore. I'll find a way to help you somehow." Until then, Thunder had still been staring at the ground, but now she looked up at Stormblade. She could not understand what compelled him to want to help her so much. Her problems had nothing to do with him, and he had enough of his own. She thought it was silly of him, but at the same time, she had to admit to herself, she didn't want to be alone. She had never wanted to be. "I have to stay around Redclaw for a while anyways," Thunder said softly. "I don't know how to hunt. I'm not used to being wild." "I'm sure Redclaw would like to teach you," Stormblade said, smiling a little. "I know he cares about you. I'm sure he'll be a good teacher." "Can he hunt like a scyther?" Thunder asked, looking doubtful. "No," Stormblade replied, "but he can show you the basics. I can help teach you how, but I won't be able to show you. You can fight well, though. I'm sure hunting will come easy for you." "Is it hard at first?" questioned Thunder, giving Stormblade another curious look. "A little," Stormblade answered, "but it gets easier. Once you see how it's done, you should get the idea." For a while, the two of them talked, sitting beside the trees, listening to the soft, calm winds and breathing in the cool night air. Thunder didn't see any real importance in their conversation, but it had been a long while since she had been able to talk to a Pokemon about anything without getting upset or angry. For the first time in a long while, she felt somewhat at peace. Somewhat. Stormblade was taken by surprise when Thunder suddenly stood up, a look that was almost anger in her eyes. "This is pointless," she snapped, though it seemed to him as if it almost pained her to say it. "All we're doing is wasting time. I don't see how I honestly thought you could help me. Are you a healer? No. Can you hunt? No. I don't see why you insist on sitting here, wasting time, when we should be resting. And all you're trying to do is falsely make me believe that you're going to help me. You're pathetic." She narrowed her eyes, then turned and stalked away. Casting a glance over her shoulder, she sneered, "Better get some rest. We're going to travel tomorrow, and I don't want you slowing us down. If you do, I'll make Redclaw drag you the whole way." Before Stormblade could call out to stop her, Thunder had dashed off, leaving him behind and heading back to the tree she had been sleeping in before. Stormblade lay down miserably on the ground, feeling confused and helpless. Why had she suddenly reacted that way, when before she had been calm enough around him? What she said hadn't even made any sense, considering that she had been talking to him peacefully before. What had he done to make her act that way? Why was she so upset with him? Stormblade felt too weak to walk back to the nest Redclaw had made for him, so instead he curled up on the ground beside the tree he and Thunder had been sitting by. He wanted to help Thunder, show her she wasn't alone, and for a while, it had seemed like it had worked. But now, he couldn't help but feel as if he had just made everything worse. Thunder feebly slashed at a branch that hung in her way as she slowly walked back toward the tree near where Redclaw was sleeping. Truthfully, she had wanted to be friends. She really had. Yet, she knew she couldn't. It would only hurt her in the end, and she wasn't sure she could face that sort of pain again. When she had been small, she had always looked to other Pokemon for support, and even friendship, in order to help her make it through all of Master's tests. But after she had to watch each of them, one by one, fail those tests and die, she had made a point to not get to know any other Pokemon too well. In the long run, making friends had never helped, only caused her pain she didn't need. She wished she had never tried to help that young Scyther in the forest, never grown close to him. It would have been better. Thunder stopped herself, quickly reminding herself that all of that was in the past. She had made mistakes, but she would learn from her mistakes. She wouldn't talk to Stormblade anymore. She wouldn't let him try to get close to her. She would make him leave her alone, make him hate her if she had to. But she had to get him to realize that they were not friends. They couldn't be. Thunder's thoughts wandered back to Snowcrystal and the others she traveled with. She had tried to help them sometimes, even when she herself wasn't sure why. And where had it brought her? Briefly, Thunder remembered trying to help free Rosie, and glanced at the bullet wounds in her side and shoulder. It had gotten her nowhere. Out of all the Pokemon she could possibly trust, Stormblade was the last one she should try to befriend. He was injured, and by a cursed attack that gave him wounds that would never heal. Wounds that would just get infected worse and worse and never get better. There was no way he could survive that. And when she had to watch him die, she didn't want to care. As the moon glistened silently overhead, the wreckage of Team Rocket's secret base lay forlorn and silent. Wind echoed sadly through the area, moving small bits of rubbish across the sandy ground. Suddenly, a bluish glow surrounded a large chunk of debris and lifted it into the air before tossing it away into the rubble. From a pile of twisted metal and splintered wood, Solus painfully hauled himself onto firm ground, picking his way over the wreckage before collapsing in the dust near the ruined building. He had been abandoned, forgotten. The Rockets who had the chance had teleported away using their Abra at the sound of the explosions, but Solus hadn't been around them, and no one had come looking. Dust and traces of blood stained the Espeon's fur, and he gave it a few quick licks, smoothing it out and cleaning some of the small cuts he'd received. The wounds the Scyther had inflicted still stung, but he left them alone. Still feeling outraged, Solus stood up and limped away, hardly giving the Rockets building a second glance. He had no way of locating his trainer. He was a wild Pokemon now. Surprisingly, he didn't feel intimidated by the thought of having to live a life fending for himself. He'd been a high-ranking Rocket Pokemon for a reason. His psychic powers were legendary among Team Rocket's Pokemon, though he was secretly still seething with rage about being forgotten. He pushed the feeling to the back of his mind. He would have no problem surviving in the wild. The only ones who had to worry now were the ones who got in his way.